Good evening, everyone. I am Craig Marshall, and I'm the Vice President of our Clinton Historical Society. And we welcome you all here, those who are here presently and those who are watching us remotely. Have you ever wondered how to clean a gravestone? Patrick O'Hara spent the summer of 2022 visiting local cemeteries while researching his family tree, cleaning over 80 cemetery markers, followed by writing narratives about the deceased and posting them to social media. This stimulated a lot of interest and discussion on the upkeep of local cemeteries. He will discuss how to safely clean a gravestone, the best cleaning solutions to use, and the basic tools and techniques. A little effort can make a big difference. Patrick grew up in Hyde Park, steeped in local history, and moved to the town of Clinton in 1998 to raise his family. He spent 25 years working at the Indian Point nuclear power plant, implementing regulatory controls for physical security and industrial safety. Presently, he has a special income tax practice in Poughkeepsie. Patrick's ancestors, the Brimp family, settled in Hyde Park in 1769 and became one of the largest landowning families in Dutchess County in the 19th century. Today, their legacy is reduced to a handful of street signs and gravestones. So now please welcome our speaker, Patrick O'Hara.
Well, thank you for that nice introduction. I don't know whether this is going to be exciting, but I'll do my best. There you go. So tonight's discussion, we're going to talk about 4 different things. I want to talk a little bit about cemetery etiquette, how to go about doing this cleaning in different cemeteries, some of the tools that we're going to use, talk about cleaning the different kinds of stones that you might encounter, and kind of how to follow up on this, because when you clean a gravestone, it's not something that's going to happen instantaneously. You're going to see some results right away, but you're actually going to see better results probably over like the next 6 weeks. So when you go into a cemetery, part of the etiquette is if it's an actively managed cemetery, you certainly want to ask for permission. Probably the most actively managed is probably the Poughkeepsie Rural Cemetery. You certainly wouldn't want to go in there and start doing something without asking if it was okay. I found them to be very helpful. There were some cemetery plots I was looking for family members when I spoke with them, and they were able to pull out their card and tell me exactly where they were located. Although, if you're like me and you have trouble with maps, it's not always easy to find stuff. But they're very helpful and very appreciative of anybody that wanted to go and do cleaning, as long as you knew what you were doing. Okay. Generally, you only want to clean stones that you have consent of the family members, or if there aren't family members, you know, people in the cemetery. One of the things when you go into a cemetery, you want to make sure that you know what kind of stones you want to clean. Some stones are just so old, you may say, you know what, I don't know if it really makes sense for me to clean this. It's just something that you need to think about when you start selecting the stones. You always want to be respectful of the site when you're going to the cemetery, because it is a final resting place for the deceased. When you go in there, you don't want to do any harm either to the site or to the stone. And I guess it's nice to say you want to leave everything cleaner than you found it. So one of the most basic pieces of equipment is going to be that water spray bottle. Basically, you pump it up with air, and it creates pressure in the bottle, and it squirts water out. The water squirts out at about 40 psi. It's not really high pressure. We use a lot of water when we're cleaning gravestones. I'm going to show you a couple of different cleaning solutions that we use. Scrub brushes, you want to use something that's probably like you might use in your kitchen, something that's not too hard with the bristles. Some people use toothbrushes, different size brushes for different things. Plastic putty knives work very well for scraping some of the debris off the stone. And sometimes for the lettering and some of the detail that you see on the stone, you might need like a special pick. And I'll show you what they look like too. These are all things you can order on Amazon and have delivered right to your home. It's not really expensive, but you do end up with a basket full of stuff when you've got to do this. And you should always consider your personal safety when you go out and do this, because if you are working with chemicals, even cleaning stuff off with water, stuff coming off the stone, if you get in your eyes, it's probably a good idea to wear gloves, but sometimes when you wear gloves, it's harder to manipulate things. So one of the tools that I've been using is actually a pressure washer. It's a portable pressure washer colored in the slide. It carries about 5 gallons worth of water. And just keep in mind that for every gravestone that you want to clean, it's probably going to take somewhere between 1 and 5 gallons of water. So usually when I would go out to clean gravestones, I would have my power washer full, or the pressure bottle that I showed you in the last slide. And I might even bring a few other gallons of water, you know, using like milk jugs or soda bottles, things like that. The water, when you apply, should be low pressure. The National Park Service, they actually recommend 500 PSI or less. So just to step back, that white bottle we showed you in the last slide, the one that you pump up by hand, that's about 40 PSI. The portable pressure washer, which I've been using, is about 130 PSI. So certainly delicate. Some of the bigger pressure washers, like you might use to clean off your deck, it's probably about 1700 PSI. So a big difference. You want to make sure that when you apply the water, it's not actually going to cut the stone or take the finish off. And when you do the cleaning, you really want the water and the cleaning agent to do most of the work. You don't want to scrub it. You don't want to use anything that's abrasive. So essentially, the cleaning solution that you use helps dissolve whatever is on the stone, and you can either scrape it off or you can use the water just to rinse it. So I'm going to show you 3 different cleaning solutions. This is probably my favorite cleaning solution. It's called D2 Biological Solution. And this is what's used by the National Park Service. This is what they use in the national cemeteries. This is what they use to clean all the national monuments in Washington, D.C. It basically helps turn the stones white. What's very important about these cleaning solutions is that they're non-ionic. Okay, so there's no charge to it. There's no salts in them. For the most part, they're pH neutral, so they're not overly acidic and they're not overly alkaline. The nice thing about the D2 solution is it's non-toxic and it's generally safe. If you get it on your hands, it's not going to hurt you. It doesn't give off any fumes. I don't think I drink it, but I've actually found it makes my hands softer. I don't know. I did want to mention the one thing about this D2 solution is you can't get it in the stores. It's something that you have to order online from some sort of specialty dealer, and it's about $50 a gallon. One of the other recommended solutions here is called this EnviroClean Revive. They say it's effective for all types of stone, concrete, brick, and masonry. It's biodegradable, safe for landscape plantings and grass. So unlike most chemicals, if you get this on the grass, you know, it's not going to kill it or anything like that. I used the EnviroClean when I first learned how to clean gravestones. And we kind of missed that in this discussion, in that I wanted to learn how to do gravestones, but I really didn't know how to go about it. And actually, I had hired somebody to clean my parents' gravestone. I paid them $300, and they did a horrible job. So I said, I got to learn how to do this. And one day I was in church, and the woman in front of me, she just turned around. She had a flyer. She said, "Do you want to learn how to clean gravestones?" I'm like, oh my God, this is perfect. So she was with the Rhinebeck Cemetery Association. So she invited me to come up, and we had kind of like a work party, which it's really kind of interesting because you ask people if they want to clean gravestones. They come to a cemetery, everybody cleans 5 stones, and before you know it, you've got 50 stones cleaned in an hour. So they were using this cleaning solution Revive. So this is kind of what I've started on, but then I kind of decided that I like the D2 better because having been a former National Park Service employee, I guess I kind of defer to the Park Service. One of the other cleaners that's out there is called Wet and Forget, and this is something you could actually get in Home Depot. So the D2 is about $50 a gallon. The Revive Restore is about $50 a gallon, and this Wet and Forget is about $35 a gallon. So it's a little bit cheaper, but it's just a little bit different. But same idea. It's the pH neutral. It doesn't have any salt in it. It's non-ionic. I just kind of think the Wet and Forget is kind of, I don't know, maybe not really truthful because you have to do a little more work than just wetting it. But again, when you clean the gravestones, putting the chemical on the stone is actually going to clean it, and it's going to clean it for about 6 weeks after you leave. And you'll actually find that over the next several months that the stones will look cleaner and cleaner. So I want to mention that you see a lot of people out there cleaning gravestones using all kinds of stuff. You never want to use bleach. Like I said, you don't want to use salt. If you're familiar with bleach, it's sodium hypochlorite. So salt is part of that bleach composition. So what happens with any kind of bleach or anything that has salt in it, it'll get inside the stone, like in where the letters are. And as it dries, it'll crystallize, and the crystal can actually break apart the stone. So you don't want to use the salt. You also don't want to use anything that's overly acidic or overly alkaline, like ammonia or vinegar, even lemon juice. You certainly don't want to use wire brushes. It can be tempting because some of those stones are pretty nasty, but you don't need to do that. You certainly don't want to use a higher pressure washer like we said before. You want to use something that's 500 psi or less. I'm a big fan of the portable pressure washer as I showed you earlier, which is something I picked up on Amazon. I think they're about $100. But again, I cleaned about 80 gravestones last year, so that was really kind of my saving grace. So if you're planning on making a career of doing this, I would say that's probably a good tool to get. So the chemicals that I showed you, some of them have spray nozzles on them where you could actually spray them right out of the gallon container. A lot of times I'll put the chemicals in the small spray bottles to use. Those chemicals can be diluted at different levels based on what you're doing. For the work that I was doing, most of the stuff was undiluted. But it's easy to carry around the cleaners in the spray bottle. And you also want to have a bucket in some clean rags. Usually in the bucket, you're just putting fresh water, and that's probably where you want to dip your brushes in if you want to do any brushing on the stones. That particular bucket in the picture, it's actually collapsible, so you can actually fold it up and it's flat, so it's really good for storage. So as I said, depending on what you're doing, you may want to have a different kind of brushes. I have some big scrub brushes that I've used to scrub some really, really dirty stones. But most of the stuff is just very delicate. And like I said, a toothbrush or something a little bit bigger, a toothbrush really works well for some of the harder spots to get in, like the lettering and stuff. I mentioned the plastic abrasive or the non-abrasive putty knives. They're very helpful. You'll find that most of what you see on these gravestones are just like a lichen. It's just like a plant that's growing on the stone, and basically we just wet it and just kind of scrape it off. So I usually buy these putty knives that come in sets of three different sizes, and I'm kind of partial for the medium-sized one, but it's good to have all three. I mentioned the pick sets. Some of the stones have like engraving in them, either with the lettering or just some kind of ornate artwork on it. And sometimes it's hard to get in there. You'll find that grass clippings and things get accumulated in there, and they just kind of solidify. And sometimes you can't get them out with just the water alone. So I would use those picks to kind of move the stuff out. Now, I mentioned some of the safety things because I'm kind of a safety-oriented guy. When you're doing this, you probably should have some gloves to protect your hands from scrapes. Very easy when you're using that scrub brush to scrape your hand against the rough stone. It's always good to have safety glasses or even sunglasses just to make sure that you don't get anything in your eye. Some people may be concerned about getting stuff in their face, their nose. I can tell you some of the stones I've cleaned, I've literally been black from head to toe. So you certainly want to protect that. I mentioned ergonomics, which is a study of how people interact with work. You want to make sure you have the right tool for the job. So if you're a tiny person, you probably don't want to have a big scrub brush. Even if you're a big person, you don't want to have a little one. The chemicals that you're using, you really want to understand what they are and how to handle them safely. For instance, some of these chemicals, you might not want to let them stay out in the sun. For the most part, those three cleaning chemicals are pretty stable. The only issue with them is that they don't work when it's usually below 50 degrees. It's better off to get them out in the warmer weather. And if you're working by yourself, you want to make sure that you have some sort of plan if you get hurt. A lot of these cemeteries, when you get there, you may find that there's no cell service. So that's something you should consider. It may be a good idea going out with somebody else. I've had my wife come out with me a couple times, but she's not a fan. So I had mentioned before, one of the things you want to do when you clean the stones is you want to identify the stone that you're going to be cleaning, and you want to understand what the condition of the stone is. And the stone that we're looking at on the slide is actually in the Pleasant Plains Cemetery. And it's probably one of the older first slides that was put up. It's Timothy Bedell. A stone like this would have me be very concerned because it's a very old stone. I would be afraid that if I leaned on it too much, that it may break or crack or maybe even just fall over. So a stone like this, I would probably clean a little bit differently from some of the other stones that are more flaky. In cleaning a stone like this, the first thing that we would do is we would wet it down and make sure that if there was anything on the stone that we could scrape off, that we would take care of that first. And then add the cleaning solution. On a stone like this, you probably could do a little bit of scrubbing, but probably not too much. The chemical actually does most of the work. But getting back, the first thing we do with the stone is you want to wet it. If there's anything rough on there, you can scrape it off. And then apply the cleaner. And usually you let the cleaner stay on there for about 10 minutes before you rinse. Sometimes I'll let the cleaner stay on there for a little bit, and if it's a hardy stone, I might take the brush and scrub it a little bit. One of the important things about cleaning these stones is you need to clean the whole stone. You can't just clean, where the name is, because you basically want the whole stone to be clean at the same time. Otherwise, you'll end up having different shades. So this is one of the stones in the Pleasant Plains Cemetery. This is John Rimpf. And when I went to look at the stone, it was just covered in this green fuzzy stuff. And again, we wet the stone and we took those plastic putty knives and I just scraped off all of the debris that was on there. Put the cleaning solution on there, scrubbed it up a little bit, and then rinsed it. And later on in the program, you'll see a before and after picture. I would encourage you that if you are going to clean a gravestone, take a before and after picture. Because sometimes when you clean the stone, you may see it afterwards and say, it doesn't really look that much better than when I started. But when you look at the picture, you realize that you made a big difference. But in the stone, it's hard to see here, but the lettering, some of it's an indentation and some is kind of like an extrusion. So you need different tools to try to clean around that stuff. And again, when you clean these stones, you want to use the chemicals and the water. Let that do the work. The scrub brushes helps, but you really want to let the chemical and the water do the work, okay? Because it's the least intrusive. So hopefully we can make this work. This is a stone that actually somebody paid me to clean this. They said, hey, I can't get out of my house. This is my parents' gravestone. Can you go out and clean this? And this is just around the corner from my office in Poughkeepsie. And it starts out at DeGarland. I think it turns into, is that Overlook? But it's an old cemetery, and we went in there. So this stone, same thing. It was covered in that green fuzzy stuff, but it was all dry. So we put the water on it. I scrubbed it a little bit, put the cleaner on it, and then I rinsed it. I had a video here, but I don't know whether it'll play. No, I guess it won't play. So, but basically, when you rinse it, you're just rinsing it from top to bottom, and most of the stuff will just kind of sheet right off. Oops. There we go. So I'd mentioned the follow-up. So cleaning the stone usually takes more than one trip. Even if you do a good job, you want to come back and look at it after it dries, because the stone will look much different after it dries. Much of the cleaning occurs after you leave. When the chemical soaks into the stone, it basically kills the algae, the lichens, and the molds. And sometimes in the stones, you don't see that, but when you spray the chemical on it, stone may actually turn orange. It's kind of scary at first, but when you realize what's happening, basically it's activating, you know, with the algae and the lichen and the molds, kind of like calling it out. And when the sun hits it, eventually it's going to die off and it's going to turn white. So like I said, as the stone dries, its color will change. It'll go from like a reddish to an orange to a white. So you'll see on some of these pictures, some of the stones out there, even after you clean them, sometimes there's still some reddish or orange spots in them. And that's usually because there probably is still some algae in the stone. And basically what happens is that algae gets in the stone and it secretes acids, and it will actually break down the stone. So it's best to try to kill the algae if you can. And as I said earlier, it usually takes about 6 weeks after the cleaning to see the full effect of the effort. Actually, in preparation for this program tonight, there were a couple stones that I wasn't really happy with last summer when I cleaned them. And I went back to them last week and took pictures, and the stones look great, even after the summer. One of the interesting things that I didn't put in the slide was that when you clean these stones with a chemical, it should stay clean for about 7 years. The chemical lasts that long. Okay, so if you're managing a cemetery, you know, you might want to keep track of which stones you're cleaning and like rotate through so that you can get them all within a certain period of time. You certainly don't want to over clean the stones because they do have polished finishes on them. You don't want to take the finish off, but you do want to keep them clean. So this slide here, you'll see that the monument, that's James Rimpf and Hannah Budd, which I guess would be probably the third generations of the Rimpf in Dutchess County. When I first saw that, I was just kind of overwhelmed. I didn't know what was going on there. That black that's on there is combination of the acid from either acid rain, could be from the pine trees, and a chemical reaction from the lichen. And actually, it's actually like a dark black, sappy type stuff. And to be honest with you, I really didn't think I could get it to come off, but it took me probably about 5 trips to go through and clean that. And I kind of bit off more than I could chew because it's tall, and I actually had to bring a ladder out there, and I don't like to do ladders, but I was able to get it done. Also used an awful lot of water in there. But that picture there of the white statue is actually one that I took last week. So over time, it's actually cleaned up very nice. This is that John Rimpf stone that I showed you earlier. And again, that picture there is one that I just took last week up at the Pine Plains Cemetery. So the little bit of effort to go out and clean these stones, it actually makes a big impact. And I don't know, I think doing it one by one, eventually we get to all of them, maybe. This is the Baker Stone. This is also up in Pleasant Plains, and I looked at this as quite a challenge because this was probably the ugliest stone I'd ever seen. And the Bakers were married into the Rimpf family as well. They were both dairy farmers, so I said I wanted to kind of take a stab at this stone. And one of the things you notice on the base, there's some black marks, and that's basically because that's where the water settles. So in these kinds of stones, one of the things that affects the discoloration mostly is the water. So you have the water, you've got the acids from the algae, you've got the grass clippings, and all that stuff. The longer it stays in the stone, the worse the stone's going to take. So that dirty stone basically had all this really hard green growth stuff on it. And just by wetting it and scraping it off, cleaning the stone up pretty nice, and then applying the chemical basically changed the color of the stone from the dark black to something closer to white. This is the Hess family at the St. James Cemetery. Not really relatives of mine, but I don't know. Has anybody here heard of the Bodensteins? They used to have an ice tool factory in Statsburg. One of the Bodenstein family members was married into the Hess family. So when I was in St. James cleaning the Bodenstein cemetery markers, I saw the Hess, and I just said, I have to take a stab at this only because it really bothers me to see the green lichen on these stones. Because it's actually very easy to clean. It doesn't take a whole lot of time. It's just a matter of wetting it, scraping the stuff off it, and applying the chemical. This is George L. Rimpf, George Lewis Rimpf, Lewis with an E. He was a World War I vet. Now, my grandfather was George Lewis Rimpf, Lewis with an O. And I was kind of baffled by this because I found him in my family tree, and I really didn't know who he was. Interestingly enough, he was a baker when he came back from World War I. And he had a bakery on Main Street, at the corner of Main Street and Catherine Street. Kind of an interesting fellow, but he died very young. But when I found his stone and I realized that he was a veteran, it really bothered me to see how poorly that stone was. And because he wasn't buried with other veterans, he was kind of forgotten. So I kind of took the opportunity to clean that up. Again, that chemical that I used, the D2 biological solution, is designed for stones like this. And I probably went back to this stone probably about 5 or 6 times to get it to lighten up like that. And again, that picture was from last week. So I was really impressed because it looked a lot lighter when I took the picture than it did last year when I finished up. This here is the Kelder family, also in Poughkeepsie Rural Cemetery. When I was doing the gravestones, which are right on the other side of the street, I happened to see this, and I was kind of interested because the Kelders were descendants of the Huguenot families, and I don't know, has anybody ever been to Kerhonkson? If you drive into Kerhonkson, there's probably the world's largest garden gnome in front of the Kelder farm. Well, George Kelder was the one that started that farm. And when he passed away, his wife, she was widowed, and the Huguenot families there had realized that Edward Rimp had lost his wife, and Mrs. Kelder had lost her husband, and kind of put the two of them together. So the Kelders are kind of in my family tree, just on a roundabout way. But anyway, he was a very interesting fellow in Poughkeepsie. He even had a car dealership. So we felt the need to clean up his stone. But again, his stone, same thing. Just do the rinse, putting the chemical on there, do a little scrubbing. There's a lot of lettering in there. All the lettering can always attract the grass clippings and stuff. And that's where the power washer comes in handy, because it basically helps clean out all of the lettering and such. Richard Knight, he was also in the Poughkeepsie Rural Cemetery, and again, not a family member, but sometimes when you look at these gravestones, they just kind of call you to be cleaned, and it's kind of a bad habit. Kind of violate my first rule, to only do the ones that you're related to. But this section of the cemetery, it was right next to the Kelder one that I cleaned, is the Civil War section of Poughkeepsie Rural. This man, he fought in the Civil War. He was in the 150th. So very interesting. He actually was an ice boat captain. He used to race ice boats, and he was commissioned by Colonel Archibald Rogers, who was a world champion ice boat person on the Hudson River. So same thing, we cleaned up his stone. A lot of scraping of algae, a lot of thick moss on there. Applied the chemical, and that picture is from last week. So basically, I cleaned that probably last August, and it still looks great. And I should say it probably looks whiter than it did before. I was in Union Cemetery cleaning my great-grandparents' gravestones, and a little bit further down, I saw this gravestone, and really, really surprised at how black it was, and it didn't have any kind of thick, sappy coating on it. Don't know what turned it black, but basically applied some cleaning solution to this, and that's what you get. And the Rimps were married into the Huguenot families, and they do have a Deo relatives. And what's interesting about this, this Deo is I found out from the Dale family that they were actually looking for this gravestone. It had been lost for 100 years, and somehow by cleaning it, I found it. So I actually let them know last week that we found it. I sent them pictures of it. Because one of the things I do when I was cleaning these gravestones is I really wanted to look and see who were these people. And you'd be surprised. You can go online, newspapers.com. You can find newspaper stories about these different people. Some of their obituaries. I don't know if you realize obituaries are kind of going away. People are writing obituaries today that really don't tell you anything about people, just about how nice they are and stuff like that. But they don't tell you who they're related to, what they did, and stuff like that. And a lot of people aren't doing them anymore because you have to pay for them. So one of the things that's important with these gravestones is to go back and look and see who these people were, and using the tools like the obituaries and such that not only tell you what they did, what they belonged to, sometimes they even tell you where they lived, which is really kind of interesting. So just by putting the chemical solution on this, this pretty much cleaned up pretty well. When I was up in Pine Plain Cemetery, kind of a strange thing happened to me when I was cleaning that very black rim statue. I had some butterflies flying around, and somehow they led me to this gravestone, and I started cleaning it. And this was also probably pretty nasty. If you look at the before picture, it just had like a really hard, crusty coating on it. And again, just from grass clippings and stuff like that. You know, when they mow the lawn, you know, blowing the grass towards the stone rather than away from the stone. I cleaned this up, and you know, basically you wet it. You take those non-abrasive scrapers, scrape the stuff off. And I talked before about having the little pick utensils. Definitely needed to use them on this stone because of all the different engraving. The after picture there is a little deceptive because it kind of looks like there's different shades of the stone, like one side looks shinier than the other. But that's just something to do with the way the lighting was that day. What's interesting about this, well, I should say that Madison and Audrey Farnham, they were both teachers for the Hyde Park School District. Madison was a foreign language teacher, and I guess he was also a football coach, because when I posted him on Facebook, people's like, oh my God, I had him. And she taught at Violet Avenue. I think they both retired in 1977. So I guess even though people retire a long time ago, you can still be remembered. But he had just become a teacher, and then he got drafted into World War II, and he was out in the South Pacific. And whatever he did in the South Pacific, he had taken copious notes, and his notes are actually, I think, in Florida State University. His notes on World War II. So these are the things that you learn when you look into people. Oddly enough, Audrey Farnham's daughter lived next to my grandparents. I didn't know that when I started doing this. So this is the gravestones for Tim and Sarah Bedell, and the before and after. Like I said, this is just a simple stone. Didn't really do a whole lot of scrubbing, just wetting it and putting the solution on. And again, I think these pictures I took probably last week, the after pictures. And this is pretty much right as you drive into the Pleasant Plain Cemetery. So I had to walk by these every time I went to clean the different gravestones. So I guess they were lucky they were on my way. Carmelo Cemetery, they were having a cleaning event where basically they asked people to come to the cemetery and learn how to clean gravestones. And I had said that I would go and help them support that. So I actually cleaned 5 gravestones while I was there, and I saw this one. I wanted to clean it, so this was the last one I did. took a lot of effort to clean this up, but I think it made a really big difference. This had like a heavy black and green slime to it, cleaning it up. Consuelo Baker and her husband, they were farmers, and they actually also worked on the Rogers estate, and I think they lived in Chesville. And this was a stone that I had cleaned probably last fall, a little bit later than normal for cleaning, because someone was getting buried in the Schultzville Cemetery, and this was the adjacent marker of a family member, so we just thought we would try to clean it up. One of the things to note is that these flat stones are probably the most difficult ones to clean. One of the reasons being is because the flat water always sits on them, and they tend to change the color. These stones that have kind of like the polished frame around it, and then the center where you basically have the engraving that's not polished, they tend to turn like a rust color. And that may be something that's engineered into the way it's done. So when you clean it, you have to make sure you clean it well enough to get it white again, because otherwise there'll still be some color in there. So this is kind of at the end of our presentation. I just wanted to point out that our cemeteries are historical treasures. All the people that are in the cemetery are people who lived real lives, and some of them did some really amazing things. Most cemeteries have little funds and minimal maintenance. I don't know if you realize, but the cemeteries here in Clinton are basically maintained by the town, and they do a good job as far as they can, but there's nobody actively taking over the maintenance. Union Cemetery, where my parents are buried, that was recently turned over to the town of Hyde Park, and I'm not sure that that's being maintained as well. Cleaning these gravestones, it's not complicated. It doesn't really take a whole lot of effort. It's just basically getting out there, wetting it, putting the chemical on it. Makes a huge difference. I would encourage anybody that belongs to cemetery associations to invite some people to come out and show them how to clean gravestones, because you can learn, you can help benefit your community by keeping these cemeteries clean, and maybe you can start an adventure of cleaning your families. So I want to thank you for sitting here and listening to me.